en un lugar de la Mancha, de cuyo nombre no quiero acordarme.
It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good
Aujourd'hui,
fortune
maman est
must-
morte. Ou peut-être hier, je ne sais pas.
When the U.S.-based Audio Publishers Association tallied audiobook sales for 2025, the figures showed a sector more successful and more popular than ever before. More of the same, you say. Is there anything new for audiobooks? Welcome to The Spoken World. I'm Christopher Keneally. The Spoken World podcast is sponsored by Penguin Random House Audio, the team behind some of the most talked about audiobooks in the industry. In June, The Spoken World presented The Next Chapter in Audiobooks, a live podcast on LinkedIn. I spoke with Robin Whitten, founder of Voices to Know, and Tom Webster, a partner at Sounds Profitable, to learn how changing audience listening habits are shaping what audiobook publishers will produce and the content that platforms will offer. Along with the sales data, the APA reported in its annual audiobook consumer survey on the rise of audio-first titles, original productions not based on a book title. Typically shorter than traditional audiobooks, audio-first titles saw revenues climb in 2025 to $136 million, a rise of 50% in just 1 year. Shorter listening sessions, shorter audiobooks. Could it also mean expanded audiences? Also in the APA survey, nearly half of audiobook users listened to an audiobook on YouTube in 2025, up 10 percentage points from 2024. I opened the discussion with the impact of YouTube listening for audiobooks. I asked Robin Whitten what that may reveal about how audiences today think about audiobooks.
Well, I think Chris, that probably the audience is on YouTube and they're listening and watching a lot of things and they're interested in audiobooks. They put audiobooks in their search, it comes up on their feed, and they start an audiobook, not really with a lot of information about where that audiobook came from.
And it may even be that their notion of what an audiobook is pretty fuzzy.
Possibly. I mean, yes, it could be the start of an audiobook. It could be a long sample. It could be an audiobook that has an AI voice. I mean, a lot of that information is not very clear from YouTube.
And Tom Webster, YouTube has long been a top platform for podcasts. So what does it mean that YouTube is now where many listeners are getting their audiobooks? Is this the next big challenge for publishers?
A challenge, but an opportunity. And I remember it was about 5 years ago, I gave a keynote at Podcast Movement, which is a big podcasting conference. And I showed some stats that showed how popular YouTube was for podcast consumption. And up to that point, YouTube had not really been seen as a podcast platform. And so a lot of people were surprised. Some people doubted the research, which, it was a huge sample. I didn't doubt the research. It's just one of those things that the audience is never wrong. And what the audience was telling the podcast industry and what I think they're telling the audiobook industry is, meet us where we are. Meet us on the screen that we're watching and don't make us change our behavior to, do something else, go to your screen, go to your store to be able to consume the content that we want to consume. Just meet us where we are. And I think, is that challenging for publishers? Yes. But I also think it's an incredible opportunity to reach people with audiobooks. And, we're going to have to change how we think about those audiences and what the definitions of success are. But it could and should be an exciting time.
But it comes to the way you enter on YouTube, and that is through what you've called a visual door. That's an important distinction.
Absolutely. And we do have plenty of research. Some of the most recent research that we put out at Sounds Profitable shows that about half of YouTube podcast consumers, and yes, I'm talking about podcasts here, but about half of them listen to more than half of the shows that they consume on YouTube as audio products. So we know that there's an enormous amount of just flat out listening on YouTube, whether that's people minimizing a tab or switching to another app or putting the phone in their pocket. But the way in is a visual door. And so that means that, you don't need to put on a full visual production of an audiobook, but there has to be a visual front door that attracts some interest. And I know I've seen some publishers doing that.
And so, Tom Webster, I want to sort of focus my discussion right now on you and the data that you collect and probe a little bit further about audiobooks and podcasts and the possible convergence that's going on there. You were saying that audiobook listeners or audio listeners are just, very much fans for audio of all forms. So do listeners for audiobooks behave any differently at all in your findings from podcast audiences?
Yeah, they do. And, first of all, there's a tremendous overlap between the two. We know from our most recent large-scale survey, which is a 5,000-person study of Americans 18 plus called the Podcast Landscape, that 3/4 of audiobook consumers are also monthly consumers of podcasts. The reverse is true, not to as great an extent. It's about 63% of podcast consumers who are also audiobook consumers. But 3/4 of audiobook consumers also listen to podcasts, and that has changed, I think, where they get them, because what we see about these audiobook consumers is that they are audio omnivores. They not only obviously index highly for listening to audiobooks, they index much more highly for things like streaming AM/FM radio, premium music streaming, even satellite radio. Their indices for these things are all, 130 to 150% higher than kind of the average. So these are audio forward people. They are audio omnivores that aren't necessarily only tied to listening to audiobooks. And increasingly, their ability to find audiobooks on the other platforms where they are consuming audio, which certainly Spotify, but also YouTube, gives them much greater opportunities to encounter the content and to sample it.
Well, you say these audiobook listeners are really audio omnivores, and I guess there would be some concerns among creators and publishers about whether these alternative format or alternative platforms might cannibalize one from the other. And do you have any data at all about this, and whether or not audiobook listeners are in fact reinforcing these habits instead of competing?
Well, I don't see them as cannibalizing really at all. First of all, the very notion of one medium cannibalizing another is sort of a what I like to call the snow globe theory of media. That all the media that people consume is in a little snow globe, and people can't break out of it. But the audience goes where they want. They will trample willy-nilly across your garden. They will find content. They will look to find content wherever they are. And if they don't find your content where they are, then maybe they'll stop looking for it, because there's always another great video on YouTube right around the corner. So I don't view it as cannibalizing as much as I do survival and being everywhere that the audience is. But that aside, what we see with the audiobook audience in particular is that right now they're over-indexing 18 to 34. And a huge part of that is platforms like Spotify, which also over-index 18 to 34. And that's, let's be frank, that's a growth area for audiobooks. I think that's an audience that, back in the days of physical media, you probably didn't see a lot of 18 to 24-year-olds or 25 to 34-year-olds strolling into Barnes and Noble to pick up a few 30 cassette boxes of Pillars of the Earth or whatever, like I used to have. And so what being where they are, I think, is encouraging sampling and trial. And what the industry has to get its head around is a lot of that trial might be, I listened to something for 60 seconds and I didn't like it. Well, that's reality today. And we need to obviously figure out, and as we have, ways to get compensated for that. But still, it's trial, and nothing gooses usage better than trial.
And this digital migration that you're speaking of, where we are seeing the younger pieces of the audience move into new platforms and begin to listen to audiobooks, is this just digital migration, or is there something more going on? Might we be seeing a redefinition for what reading a book means?
Well, I think what we're seeing with, especially again, with kind of the leading platforms in audio, again, like Spotify and YouTube, is that they're enabling much more media companionship in found time, right? If I had to remember to pack some physical media, or remember even to download an audiobook before I was going on a trip, and maybe I got delayed or whatever, and I didn't have that media with me, or I didn't have that particular service available to me, then I might not be able to consume an audiobook, or, I might have other found time during my day where I could consume an audiobook. And, being able to just sort of nip in and out of an audiobook while you're walking the dog and already be on the platform that you're using, which is really the key here, theoretically enables more found time. It enables more smaller containers of consumption throughout the day than, previously one might have seen with a dedicated, I'm going to sit down for a half hour and listen to an audiobook.
You've been speaking a lot about Spotify, Tom Webster, so I want to explore their entry into this marketplace. Spotify, of course, started in music, expanded into podcasts, and now they're becoming an important player in the audiobook segment of audio. So we've seen that position in the market grow markedly stronger when they make audiobooks available. Tell us about the strategies you see behind this push by Spotify into audiobooks.
I think it makes a lot of sense for them. I think, it makes financial sense, which we can maybe talk about later. But the impact of it is this. Right now, YouTube is by far the most popular podcast platform. And YouTube as a podcast platform beats Spotify 3-1. So, enormous numbers of people using YouTube to consume audio, whether that's podcasts or audiobooks. So that ratio is about 3-1. With Spotify, but with audiobook consumers, however, if you're an audiobook consumer, that ratio drops to 1.4-1 instead of 3-1. So Spotify has much of a platform lock as you can have these days on that particular segment of the audience, because I think that they have done a really good job as an audio-centric platform. And yes, they've made a huge push into video, and some of the biggest podcasts they offer are video. But as an audio-forward, audio-centric platform, they have been able to carve out a much stronger foothold with the audiobook audience than even with the podcast audience in general.
And what is the financial implication for this move by Spotify?
Well, Spotify, when it's playing licensed music, is basically dividing up royalties from a fixed pool to the labels. They're paying out royalties for being able to play those things. Audiobooks, especially audiobooks that they own and perhaps even generate through AI or other means. Right now there's no royalties associated with that, right? So it's really a cost of goods sold argument that the cost of goods sold for audiobooks and indeed any of the owned content that they publish, even their audio and video podcasts, has lower cost of goods sold because they're not writing these royalty checks constantly that they have to write to the record labels. So, in a sense, if they can shift the needle of the amount, kind of the ratio of music to speech on Spotify, if they can shift that needle a few degrees towards speech, then that's, financially makes a lot of sense for them as well.
And of course, the entry of Spotify into the audiobook marketplace has meant platform competition. Audible helped define modern audiobook listening, but now they've got a competitor, and it brings a very different business model into the market. Tom Webster, what do you think about how publishers should think about the shift that's happening here, and what does it possibly mean for Audible's role going forward?
Well, it's an interesting time to be Audible. I think, Audible has this advantage in that they are known for a thing. If I may be aware that I can consume audiobooks on Spotify, but when I think about what is the audiobook platform, they are absolutely known for a thing, and that's an important market position. I think when you are competing in platform wars, which is basically where we are right now, we're in the middle of platform wars. You kind of have two obvious choices. One choice is scale, which is you just try to be the mostest with the bestest on whatever that platform is. So you just acknowledge, look, Spotify is going to be very important to our strategy. So we are going to open as big a storefront on Spotify as we possibly can. So there's the scale play. And then there's the boutique play, where you essentially try to really carve out a very well-defined niche, super serve that niche, not only with audiobooks, but with community building and other kinds of content around that particular niche, and really try to plant a flag for your own special snowflake in the audio landscape. I think it's increasingly hard to be in the middle. It's increasingly hard not to do one or the other of those. And that's something that we've certainly seen in podcasting as well.
Well, Tom Webster with Sounds Profitable, thanks so much for sharing your research and your analysis here. And Robin Whitten with Voices to Know, welcome back again. And we've just been listening to Tom Webster talk about the crossover that's happening between podcast listeners and audiobook listeners. And as we all know, podcast listening can train people to expect shorter episodic experiences. So in your view, what is the challenge for audiobook publishers when it comes to bringing those listeners with that expectation into longer form storytelling?
Well, I think it is certainly an opportunity for publishers to expand, publishers of audiobooks to expand their offerings. And as you say, perhaps with more variety of shorter form. And also, as you mentioned in the beginning, the rise in original audio is a great opportunity also to expand the audience of audiobook listeners.
And when it comes to shorter formats and audio experimentation, Robin Whitten, it sounds new, but it really isn't. You've been an observer of the space for many years, and I think you pointed out that audio creators have historically experimented with forms, from all sorts of forms, from radio drama to abridged edition. So are we, in effect, rediscovering possibilities that the medium has always encompassed?
Oh, I think that's possibly true, Chris, that we certainly are seeing the dramatized full sound and full production kind of programming that was, a particularly strong element in the early days of radio drama from the BBC. And it got a lot of people engaged listening on a radio program. But what's the difference? I mean, now my radio is my YouTube channel on my phone. We're listening to the same kind of thing, dramatized sound effects, full production programming. And so, it was highly popular in early days of audio listening. And, it's resonates today for the audiences. And I think you see that. I think that may be something that is particularly popular with this growth segment of the demographics that 18 to 34 is you guys are better on these actual statistics, but that younger demographic is, really tuned into media-rich programs.
Well, it's interesting about your point about media-rich programming, because we often think about audiobooks as something that happens in a multitasking environment, something people do while commuting, exercising, cooking. They've got some media playing. But the latest APA survey found that 7 in 10 consumers enjoy audiobooks as an alternative to screen time. So Robin Whitten, I wonder if you can talk about how audiobooks are maybe the place where people go to get relief from all of that.
Well, that's possible, and then that also feeds into if you're getting away from a screen because you've got your your earbuds on and someone's telling you a fantastic story, or you're listening to something fascinating in the nonfiction world, you can go about chores, or just sit back and have a little break from the screen, which I think is becoming more and more popular and important for people in people's lives. And we certainly saw that initially come up, I think, in the research during COVID, when everybody had to be on screens all the time, that screen-free zone of just listening to something was very important. And that has continued to be important for listeners.
Well, certainly the story right now for audiobooks and for all manner of media is AI. And Robin Whitten, I want to ask you about what this is going to mean for the audiences to have such an enormous amount of content available through AI narration. We could talk about the impact on narrators as well, but what do you believe is the way forward for audiobook publishers in that world where so much more content is going to be AI narrated? How do they make sure that audiobooks retain their value?
Well, I think to retain the value in audiobooks, something that publishers really have to double down on, and I think is the standards of labeling and information about what a listener is going to encounter when they listen. That, either they have a human voice they're listening to, or they have an AI generated voice, or some of the other variations that exist. But it's important to make sure that information is available. And I think it's not something that, kind of gets buried. I think it shouldn't be buried. I think it should be prominent. And it's important for listeners to be able to learn the differences between human voices and an AI voice, and to be able to so they can make a choice.
So if I hear you right, then you think the publishers and maybe platforms as well should do more to make human narrators visible, and in a way that will help them to be more valued.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the really big initiatives that we're trying to do with Voices to Know is name recognition for narrators, because most people, when they see a film, they go to the theater, they're going to remember the name of the actors. But for some strange reason, that's not always, in fact, it's rarely the case that audiobook listeners can immediately tell you the name of the human voice that they just listened to. So I'd like to try to make that better. And that has to do with education, visibility of the narrators, and, giving them more of a showcase, because then listeners, can understand that they've got a human voice, and they may be paying more, the experience may be different, but it's a good thing. Know more about those narrators.
All right. Well, thank you, Robin Whitten with Voices to Know, for your background on all these issues and just how it shapes the experience for the audience, but also the impact on narrators. I want to go back to Tom Webster and this notion about younger audiences having shorter attention spans. And I think you like to push back on that. And you've said that the argument is not that they have shorter attention spans, but maybe higher standards.
Absolutely. And I think this is the case with a lot of today's most digitally savvy consumers. They are using multiple platforms to consume various types of content, and they may have favorite platforms for certain types of content, but they are very facile at switching from channel to channel, from feed to feed, from reel to reel, to get what they want. And so you can frame that as a short attention span, but I guarantee you hit the right show on Netflix, and that audience is going to watch 10 straight episodes of Bridgerton. They don't have a short attention span. They have much higher filters for crap. They are much more facile at being able to weed out what they do and don't want to consume, because they know they have such a myriad of choices, and it's so easy. There's no switching cost to go from one to the other. that in a lot of ways, the content that's going to appeal to them is not short attention span content, but it has to meet the highest qualities for really, kind of broad concept media, because they know that they're barely a click away from a better choice. So it makes it more difficult, but not because these consumers don't have attention spans.
Yeah, Robin Whitten, you've been an advocate for quality audiobooks for 3 decades now. How do you respond to that notion that really what the younger demographic is interested in is higher quality?
I will go for that, Tom. That's a great point. I don't think I've heard that before, but I completely agree with it. And that, the highest quality is really what we're after. And going back to human voice is always good. But that people will listen if you're engaged, whatever it is you want to consume, you're going to stick with it as long as you can.
And Tom Webster, AI is again an important topic here for the future, not just of audiobooks, but for publishing. As AI becomes more a part of the book experience in ebooks and so forth, where do you think this is going to have an impact on audiobooks? Will it possibly become a feature of every book? And what could that mean to the audiobook business?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it could become a feature of every book. And there's going to be massive economic shifts in the audiobook industry, because we've already seen it in the recorded music industry, which changed completely topsy-turvy its model for things, right? So if you think about audio as a feature of a book that would not normally be economically feasible, then you have the opportunity to audioify any book in a very cost-effective way, and maybe at some point, to make it work, it just gets bundled in with the ebook, right? Because ebooks also are again, they're slightly more insulated than everything else, but they're not completely insulated from all of this. So I think if you look at it in that way, it's an opportunity to make audio available in situations where it may not have, a lot of nonfiction books, business books, and things like that. I don't think we should get too cute about insisting that what we are doing is 100% human. Because let me posit this. Let's say that a narrator is incredibly successful at branding themselves, right? You have a Scott Brick or somebody like that who has made a huge name for themselves, and people know them. And let's say that you have an audience that would like Scott Brick to read every book. Will you say no to that audience, right? Because you can do that right now. That technology is there. Is that potentially a way to monetize catalog that you had not monetized before, back catalog prior versions of things, right? I mean, if I could have, Michael Caine read Charles Dickens to me, I would probably do that, right? So there are opportunities, there are minefields, but I think it also requires being audience and consumer first in how we think about things to discover the opportunities that await.
And Robin Whitten, how do narrators feel about all of this at this point? Audience and
They're not going to like that.
Well, if they get paid, they will, right? I mean, and that's the key. If they get paid, they will. If they become licensable, then that makes sense.
If they do get paid, that is an important thing, because they're lending their voice. But I think it's a slippery slope, because I'm not sure that they are, whether Scott Brick is going to allow anything to be read in his voice, or whether he'd like to maintain his human narration and be able to choose which books he wants to read. And I think it's maybe that's an example that's a little bit hard to argue with, because maybe that's true, but I'm not sure everybody's going to agree with you either, because they don't, where's the next Scott Brick? We don't have, and also those people out there reading the next thriller. We may never discover that next great narrator.
And Robin Whitten, if it's confusing for narrators, it's going to be confusing for the audience as well. And you briefly mentioned that labeling and guidelines and transparency around all of this is going to be very important to keep the audience engaged.
Yes, I think so. I think it's very important to have that recognition of the human voices or the non-human voices or the authorized. I'm trying to remember the exact term, the authorized voice, which is what I think Tom is talking about. If Scott Brick were able to have any book read in his voice, I believe that's the authorized voice, something like that. And some narrators have agreed to do that and get paid for that. But it needs to be clear for our listener, because there's a lot of listeners just want to consume these things. They're not going to pay a ton of attention, which is one of the issues going on YouTube, I think. It's very hard to know what you're actually listening to. Easy to find audiobooks. Very hard to know whether you're actually listening to an authorized copy and who you're listening to.
And Tom Webster, I'd like to close out the discussion with asking for a little bit more thoughts from you on this point you made about the platforms and how they can distinguish themselves either by going to scale or by building distinctive communities. And I wonder whether publishers, creators get caught in the middle of that kind of thing.
Oh, I think they do. But something I've always said about podcasts, I think is also true about either establishing an imprint or your own sort of flagpole store on the corner for this kind of thing. I think you have to build a theater, and the actual performance of the thing, whether it's a podcast or the audiobook, that's the thing that happens on stage. But there are two other components of the theater that I think you need. I think you need a backstage. And that's a place where the audience could potentially meet the creators, mingle with them in some limited way, right? I think that helps keep them engaged and helps brand the narrators, to Robin's point, things like that. I think you need a backstage. I also think you need a front of house. And that front of house is where people can look around and see, oh, wow, a lot of other people like this. I'm not alone. And maybe I'll buy a shirt. And that is something that audiobooks really lack, is that sort of social proof. Oh, other people are doing this. It's a shared experience. I'm not a nutball who's the only person in the world who likes this. People love that sort of thing. So I think you need to build a complete theater in order to really make it as a media publisher right now.
Well, did you have a chance to visit the Audible Story House, the pop-up in New York, and get a sense of whether that was getting towards this point you're making about a community and so forth?
I did not, no.
It's on my list for in a couple weeks. I want to make sure I get there and see.
I think it might be too late. I believe it was only for the month of May, unfortunately. It was one of those pop-ups that come and go, but it was, I did have a chance to visit it, and it was really interesting to see how they had sort of grappled with the challenge of the physicality of something that is a digital form and tried to give the listeners ways of browsing and discussing. And this, even just like you have a bartender might tell you what to have for a drink, there were story tenders who were suggesting stories to you. And it seemed like a really innovative way of approaching all of this.
Oh, I love that, because I think, to Tom's point, that, people have apologized for listening to a book for a long time. I think we're past that. We don't have to apologize anymore. And to get that to the front, to being accepted, and to be able to find other people who want to talk about the audiobook in your book club, or, across a table sharing a glass of wine. Let's talk about them. That's a great thing to build that sort of front of the house idea.
Well, I'm so glad I was able to find both of you, and I really have enjoyed our discussion today. We've reached the end of our special live podcast, The Next Chapter in Audiobooks. From the spoken world, Robin Whitten, founder of Voices to Know, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Chris.
And Tom Webster, partner at Sounds Profitable, thank you as well for joining me.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That's all for now. Our producer is Jeremy Brisky of Burst Marketing. Rob Simon is our executive producer. With support from Penguin Random House Audio, the Spoken World podcast covers the latest news in audiobook publishing and features exclusive interviews with audiobook industry leaders, analysts, and innovators. Learn more at spokenworld.media and subscribe on all major podcasting and streaming platforms. I'm Christopher Kenneally. Join me again soon on The Spoken World.